Hello, my name is Elena Warner, and I'm currently a student at ASU in the SPE 593 class. Here is just my abstract of my applied project, and it's just going over my study and the experimental design I have chosen, a little bit about the participant in the study, and just some of the results that were found within the study. I'm just going to pause so you can read it for a second. So, the title of my poster is The Effects of Teaching Independent Dressing to a 4-Year-Old Boy Diagnosed with Autism Using Forward Chaining and a Visual Sequence. So, the study that we worked on over this semester is I was teaching the participant how to independently dress using a forward chaining and a visual sequence support. So, the rationale for this study is the participant maintains no independent skills for dressing. So, the participant's name within the study is Rocky. And the research question for this study was: will a forward chaining procedure help increase a 4-year-old boy who is diagnosed with autism daily life skill of being able to independently dress himself? So, the participant is a 4-year-old boy who is diagnosed with autism, and Rocky, the participant, currently receives at least 37 hours of ABA a week, and it goes back and forth between the daycare setting and the in home setting. So, the reason that this study and this intervention was brought up is because the participant is getting ready to prepare to go to kindergarten. So, the kindergarten program that he is going to enroll in has some prerequisites of using the bathroom completely independently. So, this is independently dressing is tied into this because the client can independently use the restroom. He is just not able to undress and redress after using the restroom, and there is no skill of dressing at all that the client has prior to this intervention. So Rocky again is participant the participant is preparing to go to kindergarten, and the intervention is created to set the participant up with the independence and generalization of the daily life skill targeting the behavior of all independent dressing steps. So, based on the research of the studies that were reviewed during the literature review matrix, forward chaining procedures are very effective when teaching a life skill or a step by step procedure or behavior. So, one of the articles during this assignment that was reviewed was about an individual being taught with the forward chaining procedure how to follow a recipe. And that really stood out to me because along with dressing, following a recipe is a step by step procedure, and forward chaining really helped that individual learn how to not only follow a recipe, but be safe within the kitchen, be safe in the environment, and be able to not only carry that over within that single recipe, but it was carried over with a bunch of recipes and in different environments. So, along with that, data was also collected within the studies and reviewed to support forward chaining when teaching a skill. Now, in my references, it states an article called Using Point of View Video Modeling and Forward Chaining to Teach Functional Self Help Skill to a Child with Autism. And this article stood out to me the most while completing the literature review matrix, as it was using a forward chaining procedure to teach a self help skill, but it also used a phasing procedure where the step by step and the chaining procedure was down into phases. So that's where I decided to use that as a reference into this intervention and study. And the client and participant was taught in a phase by phase intervention. So, the method that was used during the study was a changing criterion design, and that was used to display the data throughout this intervention and study. So, I chose that design because it allows you to basically show the baseline and then every phase after baseline, which is perfect for this study as there were 3 different phases and it showed all data during each phase. And the independent variable during the study is a forward chaining procedure supported with a visual sequence. The dependent variable was the participant's skill to independently dress himself. And the data collection method was a data sheet that was specifically made for this intervention. It broke down all of the phases that were for this intervention along with all of the steps. This intervention and study was 9 steps, and the data collection sheet had all 9 steps, and you either marked if the client and participant could complete the step independently, correctly, and if not, there was a prompt used, then it was marked incorrect. So the method continuing, baseline data was collected on all 9 steps of the dressing sequence over 5 consecutive sessions. So baseline started on a Monday and it ended on a Friday, and all 5 days was baseline data. So no prompting was used throughout this whole intervention. And data was collected specifically on the ability of the client's skills to independently dress himself after the SD was presented. So Rocky was presented with the SD, time to get dressed, and data was collected on each step of the dressing sequence. All steps that the participant could complete independently were marked correct, and all that were not completed independently were marked incorrect. So the intervention procedure, the teaching procedure with dressing will be provided using a forward chaining technique with a visual sequence procedure. So along with the forward chaining technique, we were presenting visual support for the individual as he went down the sequence. This intervention procedure consisted of collecting data in 3 phases. So, phase 1 was the first 3 steps of the intervention. Phase 2 was the first 3 steps again, which were mastered in phase 1, and then the next steps, which consisted of steps 4 through 6. And phase 3 was the last phase in the study, so it consisted of all of the 9 steps, but the last 3 steps, so steps 7 through 9, were being taught, while steps 1 through 6 were mastered. This was so that the intervention continued and not all steps were being taught as once, and it also guaranteed that the client was still practicing the steps that he already mastered throughout the intervention and could apply it while learning the sequence continuously. So the client must be able to independently perform the steps in the target for 3 consecutive sessions, scoring a 90%. Then that will be considered the mastery. So before moving on to the next phase, the client will have to receive a score of 90% for 3 consecutive sessions, and then it will be mastered and you can move forward with the next phase. The intervention will take place in the client's bathroom, as when doing the interview with the guardian. The bathroom is where dressing takes place in home. And before intervention takes place, all of the materials must be in the bathroom, including the participant's clothing and the visual sequence. And this just helps the client have the most success when entering the intervention. So data collection will be taken on the data sheet that is specific to the intervention. And again, once each phase has met the criterion of 90% for the 3 consecutive sessions, the intervention will move forward. And after all of the 3 phases have been met at a 90% for 3 consecutive sessions, the intervention will be placed into maintenance. And then after maintenance, there will be follow-up. After the intervention is placed into maintenance, maintenance will be continued, but there will be a follow-up run of the intervention to test if the client still maintains the skills to be able to independently dress himself, and the intervention is still, the study is still, basically he mastered it and is moving forward. If the client is still not meeting criterion when the follow-up intervention is run, then it will be put back into intervention. So when it is in maintenance and there's a follow-up, if the client is not maintaining that skill, the program will be put back into intervention for it to be reviewed again and taught again. So the steps and procedures. The intervention will occur one time within the participant's in-home ABA schedule. So although there is 5 days of ABA at home, if there's a cancellation, we will have continue the intervention on any day that there is in-home ABA session. So the steps for this intervention is prior to the intervention and study to occur, the materials should be set up in the setting that the intervention will take place. So the clothing should be put on the stool. That is where the client's guardian always puts the clothing when dressing at home, and the visual schedule sequence should be put in the bathroom as well. The first step is the participant will be transitioned into the bathroom. The second step is the therapist will point to the visual sequence and deliver the SD time to get dressed. Now, the third step, the therapist will collect data on any of the targeted phases that are in intervention. So, for example, if you're in phase 1, you're only collecting data on the first 3 steps. The rest of the phases will be fully prompted, and we're teaching those phases. So if you're in phase 2, you'll collect data on the first 3 steps along with the first 6 steps that will occur. That goes into step 3. Data will only be collected on the targeted phase. So then step 4 is the therapist will prompt the participant throughout all steps that are not being targeted and are being taught. So there are 3 phases and there's 9 steps. And then after the sequence is completed, which leads you to the 5th step, the therapist will provide reinforcement. The client is very encouraged by praise and any type of verbal reinforcement, so that will be provided at the end of the sequence. So moving forward with the results of the study, baseline intervention was collected with no prompting procedure for 5 consecutive sessions. So baseline was collected over 5 consecutive sessions, and so after that was ran, baseline days 1, 2, and 4, there were no steps where the client could independently complete without any prompting. On baseline days 3 to 5, there was 1 step independently completed after the SD was presented, but there was no correlation that was observed with the sequence. So the client had heard the SD and independently completed one of the steps, but it was not with the visual sequence or in correlation with the study. So after the intervention began, the client was observed to be attending to the task more than during baseline. And as shown as the graph, the intervention continues over sessions. So every session that occurred, intervention occurred 1 time during the session. And that is displayed on phase 1 in the graph. So over the course, phase 1 is still in intervention, but the trend of the graph is increasing, which is displaying a successful intervention. And by the 3rd day of intervention in phase 1, session 8, the client had independently completed at least 1 step of the phase. So as those sessions occur, the trend continues to go up as intervention continues. So we only got to phase 1, and the data translates that the intervention is successful as the trend continues to increase and the participant is learning the targeted behavior. There are steps of the intervention and the phases that the client is able to complete independently once the SD is provided. It's just that as we get to the discussion part, altogether, the study of this intervention was successful to show that the forward chaining along with the visual sequence is effective when working on teaching independent dressing. A downside of the study that I did find is that it is very time consuming as the client is being taught in phases. So over this course, we only got to phase 1, and the client is on an upward trend to gaining mastery in phase one, but we were not able to see that yet. So it's a very time consuming intervention. And one observation that could be changed that was made throughout the intervention is a different method of a prompting sequence that could be used to teach the skill in a more effective timeline. And this intervention was a learning experience, as I recognize how there may be trial and error when creating an intervention and choosing the best design for the intervention to be effective. So, as we were running the study and learning about the client, how he responded, especially during baseline, things were modified and changed within the design of the study. Originally, I had created an A B design, and after reviewing the article, especially the article that's mentioned on the reference of using point of view modeling, video modeling, the changing criterion design worked better, as it is able to show the data and the baseline and the phases as the intervention continues. So overall, the intervention was effective for the client, but there are things that could be changed or were not observed, as the client is still only in phase one of the intervention. But overall, it was positive, and it shows that a forward chaining and visual sequence is effective when teaching the life skill of independent dressing for a 4-year-old boy who is diagnosed with autism. And below my references are the Cooper with the Applied Behavior Analysis book and the article that's written, which is titled "Using the Point of View Video Modeling and Forward Chaining to Teach a Functional Self-Help Skill to a Child with Autism." These two references really supported my decisions throughout the entire intervention and supported the facts moving forward of how the intervention translates and if it was effective or things needed to be changed. So, thank you so much for listening to my presentation. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.